Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Due to the number of participants we have with us, phone lines will be muted for the duration of this webcast. However, we do still encourage you to ask questions. You can do this by using the questions feature in your toolbar. Questions will be fielded at the end of the presentation, and any we can't get to will be followed up with offline. The webcast slides will be distributed to you within 48 hours of this presentation. I'm now going to turn things over to our first speaker today, Mike Vermillion, Vice President of Service Industries here at J.D. Power. Mike?
Hey, thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. My name's Michael Vermillion. I'm head of strategy and innovation for the service industry segment here at J.D. Power. And joining me for the webinar today is Brian Quirk, who's head of partnerships for Centric Digital, and Brian is based in New York. So, Brian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So as Mike said, head of partnership with Centric Digital, and Centric Digital is a digital measurement firm.
Okay, thanks, Brian. All right, Carolyn, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the game plan for today is we plan to go about 40 minutes or so with the slides, and then we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But essentially the idea is we want to start at a high level and talk a little bit in strategic terms about your digital vision and then why digital adoption is important. We also want to cover the definition of digital adoption and also some considerations around measurement and benchmarking and goal setting. So once we kind of get through that part of it, we do want to dive into some specific examples of the types of challenges that we see pretty commonly across our client base when it comes to digital adoption, and then provide some specific examples of some case studies and best practices where we see things working well when it comes to digital adoption. And then at the end, we'll come back and talk a little bit about enrolling the organization and how to get started. So that's the plan. And I think, as Caroline may have explained here at the beginning, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat feature of the GoToWebinar, and we'll capture those, and then we'll pick those up and address those here at the end. So, Caroline, if you have the next slide, please. Okay, and the next one. There we go. Great. So the starting point for us, if we were going to sit down and have a conversation around digital adoption, our first question for you would be, what is your digital vision? And the reason we ask this isn't for us to judge, right or wrong. It's really more for us to get a good understanding of how well defined your digital vision is. So whether you're a company that's on the road to transform the entire organization, entire culture to digital, or if it's simply something much more narrow in terms of your challenge to perhaps optimize a channel, just understanding where you're going and what you're trying to achieve, and that what that is. But also, the other question we would have for you would be, does your organization understand your digital vision, and is your organization aligned with it? So just to encourage a little bit of participation here, we are going to ask a poll question to get started. So Carolyn, if we could bring that poll up. So let's just take a minute to do this. Please rate this statement on a scale of 1 to 5. And the statement would be, our organization understands and is aligned with our digital vision. So 1 would be strongly disagree, and 5 would be strongly agree. So Carolyn, let's just take another 45 seconds or so. Okay, we're going to close the poll here in 3, 2, 1. Okay, the poll's closed, and we should be bringing up the results. And by the way, this is the first time we've we've used this polling feature for our webcast, and it looks like it's working, so that's good news. So it looks like we have a well-dispersed group here on the call today, with 25% that disagree and 15% strongly agree, and then everybody else in the middle. So I think we've got a good distribution of organizations on the call for this webcast. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Carolyn. So just want to touch on briefly why digital adoption is important. And one data point that we'd like to share with you, and if you're a banking client, you probably have already seen this, but our data shows that as, for example, in the banking industry, as the use of mobile banking apps has increased dramatically from 2011 to 2016. This is data from our 2016 mobile banking study. We've also seen customer satisfaction increase at the same time. But the thing that really kind of caught our eye when this data came out last year was the fact that the satisfaction with the mobile channel has actually increased at a faster rate than the other channels, to the point where today the satisfaction with the mobile channel is actually higher than in person or any other channel. So clearly a correlation here between digital adoption and increasing customer satisfaction. So Brian, I think we've got some other data to share as well. So Carolyn, if we could get a slide 7. There we go. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So in addition to customer satisfaction, what we're seeing, and as most people know, there's an increasing use of digital channels just to conduct business. So in 2017 alone, there are $453 billion of sales conducted through a digital channel. And increasingly so, that digital channel is actually becoming a mobile channel. So from 2016 to 2017, as customers actually get used to using mobile applications and using their phone for things like service inquiries and actually shopping, we've seen a 54% increase in terms of usage of apps to conduct shopping. And that's important as we actually turn on new digital channels like voice and actually take an omni-channel approach. And what we're seeing in the market today is actually organizations which are adopting multi-channel and omni-channel strategies are seeing increased customer retention rates as compared to organizations which only focus or treat digital in a silo. Next slide, Carolyn. So one example of a company which is doing an excellent job in this space today is actually Walgreens. So Walgreens has enacted and rolled out really an exceptional omni-channel strategy, and they're seeing a six-fold increase in terms of how much customers spend when they engage cross-channel and through omni-channel means rather than just in-store alone. So how have they done this today? Well, the first thing they did is actually they're focused on experiences. So what does that mean? It's really about building out the experiences which fit the customer journey, like turning on pharmacy chat, for example. So I've seen a major uplift in terms of usage of pharmacy chat, which has increased sales volumes for the corporate company. Next thing they've done, they've actually put and enabled APIs for third-party integrators, so allowing other companies to actually tie into their customer loyalty programs. The next thing they've done, they've actually built a best-in-class mobile experience for their customers. And this is pretty critical because you actually see today 70% of Walgreens customers are engaging through their mobile app, and 50% of that app usage is actually conducted in-store. And the last point here is really where they're being successful is actually connecting the online to the offline capabilities. So ensuring that it's not just digital or a digital channel in isolation, but actually connecting that back to the in-store experience. Next slide, please. So Mike, what is digital adoption all about? Maybe this one you can kind of jump in.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll take it. So yeah, Carolyn, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So we another starting point we thought to really kind of level the playing field here was just to define digital adoption. So when you say digital adoption in your organization, what does that mean? And so some things that we would consider to be kind of watch outs as you're defining digital adoption and and then aligning your organization around that definition. So first would be we're talking today about consumers, not employees. So if you look up digital adoption in the literature, you'll see a lot of articles and white papers and so forth around employee adoption. But just to be really specific here, we're talking about consumers, not employees. A second consideration is around metrics. We'll talk more about metrics here in a minute, but there's a big difference between downloads and utilization. So just because someone has downloaded your app, for example, doesn't mean that they're going to use it. And so when you're talking about digital adoption, make sure you're clear about what it is you mean in terms of the metrics. And then finally, the third point here would be around cross-channel considerations. And so our coaching here would be when you're talking about digital adoption, you don't necessarily want to blindly set the goal of moving to 100% digital because, and we'll show you some data here in a minute, what we're finding is that actually an omni-channel experience where you're combining physical plus digital actually results in, number one, higher revenue, but also number two, higher customer satisfaction. And so really the takeaway here is make sure that when you're talking about digital adoption and setting goals for digital adoption in your organization, that it's really well defined, and you're defining what it is and what it includes and what it is not. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Carolyn, please. So just to make the point on the importance of the definition, this is another data point from one of our banking studies. This is from the 2017 retail banking study. And what we found in that study is that customers kind of bucketed into the four groups. So there's at one extreme, there's the digital-only customers, and at the other end of the spectrum were the branch-only customers. And then in between, we have digital-focused customers, but they use the branch occasionally. And then there are the branch-dependent customers that use digital occasionally. And I think the real interesting takeaway here is that for customers at either end of the spectrum, digital-only and branch-only, we actually see lower satisfaction levels than we do for the customers who are using both channels, with actually the highest satisfaction being the branch-dependent customers who use digital. So the point we're trying to make is that be careful and be thoughtful about how you define digital adoption and how you set your goals, because you don't want to do it blindly. You want to do it in the context of the overall goals for the organization in terms of driving customer satisfaction and revenue. Okay, Carolyn, we go to the next slide, please. Another point that we wanted to touch on before we get into the strategy and the tactics is around measurement and benchmarking, because we do a lot of that here at J.D. Power. And so starting with measurement, I just wanted to share some examples of typical digital metrics that we would see at an organization, both internal along the lines of acquisition, engagement, customer satisfaction, and performance, but also for benchmarking purposes, best practice type metrics when looking at things like experience, features, and processes. So the point we want to make here on measurement is that you want to be thoughtful again about what you're measuring and how you're setting goals. So we already made the point about downloads, but another metric perhaps to be careful about would be average visit time and screen views per visit. On the one hand, that may sound like a metric that you would want to maximize, but on the other hand, if somebody is looking at a lot of screens to solve a problem because they've come to your website or they're using the app to solve a problem, for example, that could actually represent frustration and the fact that they're not able to actually solve the problem. So you may actually be aiming for the wrong target there. Another example would be in the App Store. We've got ratings and reviews, and that's another one that we would caution you to be thoughtful about when using those metrics. Carolyn, just go to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this one. So just as an example, if you go into the App Store right now and look at the reviews for Southwest Airlines app, the one on the far right, I saw this yesterday, I thought it was interesting. It's just an example of a review from a grandmother who had her grandson on Southwest, and the flight attendants were very kind to the talkative grandson. And there's some more comments about amusement and hot chocolate and so forth. But in reality, this review had nothing to do with the app itself. So just a quick example of being thoughtful about the metrics you're using for customer satisfaction, for example. So Carolyn, let's go back. Okay, great. And then in terms of benchmarking, that's something, of course, we highly encourage when it comes to looking at your digital metrics, and especially when it comes to goal setting and also around best practices. And that's if that's not something you're doing today, it's certainly something we can help with. And Brian, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover on, especially around benchmarking and goal setting.
Yeah, no, I'd just add, in addition, and you covered this a little bit, Mike, but in addition to looking at those internal digital metrics, it is increasingly important to ensure that you have, the right concepts associated towards your navigation and wayfinding. So Mike used the example of if you have a customer who takes them 12 or 18, 25 screens to actually achieve that overarching objective, whether it be a pay a bill or shopping cart experience, you do want to make sure that you're optimizing against what the best practices are in the market today. And it's pretty critical, especially as digital becomes an increasingly important channel and really to maintain the use of that digital channel. That's all I kind of add in terms of goal setting, Mike.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Brian. So the takeaway here is to be thoughtful about it, to use benchmarking when possible. And that's especially true when it comes to goal setting. We see this a lot where when we sit down and talk to an organization about goal setting, a lot of times we find that the goals are set blindly or without a lot of data. And so benchmarking can help you set realistic and achievable goals, number one, but also number two, make sure your goals are aggressive enough to ensure that you're keeping up with the market. So Caroline, let's go to the next slide, please. And one more. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so now we want to get into a little bit about tactics and some examples of best practices. So there's a lot of challenges associated with digital adoption. Three that we wanted to highlight today and talk a little bit about today. One would be around awareness and trial. So how are customers going to find out about your digital assets and your app specifically, and why are they going to use them? A second challenge is around utilization. So they found the app, they downloaded it, but they're not using it. And so how do you answer the question, what's in it for your customers? And then a third challenge is the term containment. What we mean by that is once the customer is in the digital channels and they're using it, how do you keep them there? And I think the thing we're going to talk about there is maybe that isn't necessarily the right goal. But containment's a word that we see a lot, and so we wanted to talk about it today. So Brian, let's maybe go to the first case study on slide 16.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of premier examples of awareness and trial is actually Kaiser Permanente, which is, I think most folks know them, but a large healthcare provider and insurer based on the West Coast. So Kaiser Permanente, over the course of the last really 3 to 5 years, have really invested in terms of how they bring digital to market and getting folks to use digital as a go-to channel to alleviate some of the costs associated with healthcare. So as today, from 2017, actually 59% of total patient interactions occurred through a digital channel for Kaiser Permanente, which is absolutely huge. And that's actually an uplift from 2016 and from 2015 as well. So they're really investing heavily in terms of getting customers associated with their digital channels and really driving awareness and getting people to trial and see what works for them. So what has their approach been to getting folks into the digital channels of which they're trying to drive? The first one is really doing the basics. So streamlining the process of actually turning on those channels. Online registration is pretty critical. You need to know who you're talking to, especially in the healthcare world. So actually helping customers and reduce the time it takes to sign up, reduce the level of effort to actually get them in the channel. The next thing they've done is they actually made it better. So providing a better experience through something as basic as appointment scheduling. To us today, it probably seems pretty simple because we're pretty used to that. We expect that actually as customers. But when they first started this, actually appointment scheduling is really challenging, and making sure that you're providing the right experience for that patient so that they're going to continue to engage in that digital channel. And more importantly, making sure that the customers and patients are aware of the different features and capabilities of which they can actually enable and pursue through the different digital channels which are being made available. Another big thing, especially with an organization like Kaiser Permanente, with a large physical presence, is actually training the staff and helping the staff actually become digital enablers. So helping them actually coach the patients. So actually each doctor, which is unique to Kaiser Permanente, actually works for Kaiser Permanente. So helping the doctors at the end of the visit recommend next time you should register for this digital solution. This is actually where the benefits are, and actually coaching their staff to train their customers and train their the patients to engage through digital means. So Kaiser Permanente has really been a great example in terms of generating awareness and really helping clients adopt the digital channels of which they're trying to drive. And again, we've seen tremendous uplift in terms of their use of digital from patients into Kaiser Permanente's estate, and they continue to invest to really reduce the health costs associated to delivering the services, and then again, providing a better customer experience for their patients.
So Brian, before we move on, my takeaway from this example is number one, you have to make it easy. So I think that's what we're seeing here with the streamlined online registration. I think another takeaway is that you have to meet your customers where they are. You have to come to them. You can't expect them to come to you. And then I think the third takeaway I got from this was that it's important to equip the locations and the staff with ways to enable the customers to enroll in the digital channels. So did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. So it's definitely about making it easy and making sure that your staff is enabled to really demonstrate that capability. And again, I think Kaiser Permanente is doing a great job in terms of how they're actually rolling that out across their different hospital units and different practice areas.
Okay, thanks. I think we probably move to the next one.
So when we talk about utilization, you might kind of tee it up in terms of you get people in the channel. So how do you actually make sure that they're using it? And this really goes back to the experience which you're trying to drive. And Sephora is a great example of an organization who's done a phenomenal job here. So they've actually seen an 8 times uplift in terms of their digital gift card revenue year over year. And that's phenomenal. It's really just a tribute to how they're using digital today and really how they're getting their customers to engage through digital channels. So what has their approach been? Number one, it's really around personalization. So they actually have been a leader and a pioneer in terms of combining how people use their loyalty programs and really understanding who their customers are. So they developed IQ services to actually give recommendations based off of skin color, based off of preference, based off of really who that customer in person was. It's been critical in terms of driving utilization for them because they're developing that excellent top-class experience for the customer through digital means. The next thing they did, they actually connected the physical and digital. And we talked about that a little bit with Walgreens, but Sephora is another example of being able to develop tools like appointment scheduling to actually get people not only in that digital channel, but using digital and bringing that into the store through appointment setting to keep and maintain that engagement across that mobile app and across the different digital channels. Another big component, and this is pretty critical, especially as digital becomes a driver for businesses, is the organizational alignment of digital within the organization. Oftentimes, especially in the e-com world, we see traditional retailers focus with a digital e-com team, and you've got your in-store team. Sephora has taken a different approach. They've actually combined those groups, and they're more focused on the customer journey, and they've actually aligned their organization to focus on the journey for each individual customer, and that's enabled them to roll out a much more coherent digital strategy and a much more coherent customer journey to really drive utilization across all their different channels. And the last component here, data. Everyone hears about data today. It's about how do you actually integrate data, how do you actually use it, how do you actually understand the different data sets so you can deliver the best-in-class customer experience to them at the right time. So Mike, that's Sephora. Again, we see them as kind of a leader in this space. They've really turned on their loyalty programs. They've really embraced digital and omni-channel features. And we see their app today as kind of a best-in-class example of being able to bring that online to offline. I'm not sure what your take is.
Brian, when we were prepping for this earlier in the week, I know that Carolyn, our host today, was very excited about the Sephora app and actually buys a lot of their product from her phone. But my takeaway here is that realigning the organization and integrating the data, that makes sense, but those are pretty, those can be kind of longer term strategies. So my takeaway from this one is the personalization, and this is something that Mary Meeker in her Internet Trends report last week talks a lot about as well, is something to really focus on. And then this idea that we've already talked about, and I think we'll probably be talking about some more, is this idea of connecting the physical with the digital, and with the example here being for the appointment scheduling. So I think those are the key takeaways for me on Sephora.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know personalization has been kind of a buzzword for really the last 2 years, but based off of recent reports, it seems like 2018 is really the year where personalization is going to be taking hold, and Sephora is an excellent example of an organization who's using it to their advantage. So the next kind of challenge that we called out here is around containment. And containment, as Mike said, is about keeping people in that channel. And that can be perceived as a good thing, especially if you're trying to drive people to a cost-effective channel. But you really need to look beyond just that one kind of approach and look at actually where's your customer going, because it's not just about online only or offline only. It's kind of a common theme we're talking about today for digital adoption. Dick's Sporting Goods is actually an excellent example of integrating their e-commerce and their physical locations to drive containment. Sounds a bit like an oxymoron here, but what they've actually been able to do is by bringing their digital presence in store, they're actually driving their e-commerce numbers up. So they've seen a 24% increase in e-commerce sales in this latest quarter, Q1 2018. And that's happening both outside the store, outside actually physical presence of a Dick's Sporting Goods, and actually inside the store as well. It's pretty interesting in terms of their approach. So the first thing they've done is to merge that digital experience. Is a lot of people will do the exploratory shopping, the search through a mobile device external to the store. They'll actually want to check out the goods and get a feel, whether it be trying on a pair of shoes, trying on different sporting apparel, or even testing equipment in the sporting goods, for a sporting goods example. So Dick's actually merged that digital connection, that mobile app experience, that e-commerce experience in store as well by doing two things. One, they actually enabled their retail staff, so providing that same experience to each of the retail staff. So those folks who are now in the Dick's Sporting Goods stores are not just able to talk to the goods which are available, so on the shelf, but actually they've got the entire catalog. They have that endless aisle at their hand and at their fingertips. The other thing they've done is providing or creating geofence location-based targeting. So Dick's Sporting Goods, if you have their app, they know when you're in the store. So they can actually provide you alerts and deals based off of where you are in the actual store, based off of the physical location, if they've got a special sale in your area, which has actually driven up conversion rates and driven up the total order value in terms of goods purchased when people are actually in store, and then also being able to connect that last component, that loyalty data. So a lot of organizations have a struggle to actually connect the individual from their purchase point, if it's a physical purchase, to a digital purchase. And Dix has actually made that a seamless experience, so they can offer you the right solutions, the right products, the right goods at the right time based off of what your needs are. So we've called this out as a great example of an organization who's taken an approach to containment, which is not isolated to a digital channel. They've actually enabled their physical stores to accept the digital channels as well, which it's about providing the right channel to the customer at the right time and really enabling preference. So this is an example, Mike, that we called out. We think they're doing great things in the digital arena, and it's one that we look to as an example in the retail space.
Yeah, I like the geofencing. That's clever. We actually see that in hospitality, and we're starting to see it in airports now as well. But the one I really like here is the endless aisle idea, where the employees have the tablets. They're able to go online and order from the warehouse, even if the products aren't in the store. So my takeaway here is that it's really about creating that kind of virtuous circle between physical and digital is what containment really means. I think in this sense.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Mike. It's really about how do you create that virtuous circle where folks are able to conduct business essentially on the channel of preference, whatever's easiest for them to, at the end of the day, get the products and the services which they're looking for. So one additional thing, and Carol, just looking at the next slide, we've talked a lot about experience and in terms of enabling digital channels, but one thing that we always consult and really offer as advice to folks when they're looking to roll out or enable different digital experiences is don't just focus on the top line experience level. You also have to look at the different technologies that will facilitate those best in class experiences. So do you have the right data platforms in place? Are they turned on? Are the different platforms talking to each other? And we know this can get really challenging, especially on the IT side, but it's something just to consider as you actually look to enable your organization for digital adoption and to drive digital adoption and penetration in your customer base. Do you have the right technologies and structure in place to be successful?
Yeah, so Brent, I think the takeaway on this one is that I suppose the majority of the people on the call today are not from the technology organization, and so we would just encourage you to sit down and work with your technology partners to outline what the vision is and where you're going, and to identify where they can help you get there.
Absolutely, and we did put kind of that visualization of an iceberg on there. Not the greatest kind of iceberg, but really just to kind of show there's a lot of what happens above the scenes and above board, which we're all kind of familiar with and we can touch and feel and we recognize because we all have the mobile app on our phone. We all can go to the website. We can all experience that digital channel. But as we know as professionals, there's a lot that happens to enable that from the technology perspective and then also from the process and organizational perspective. So it is about setting up your organization and really engaging with the different parts of your organization so that you can be successful in terms of driving digital adoption.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So Carolyn, let's go to the next slide, please. So before we finish up, we did want to touch on this idea of enrolling the organization. And we said at the beginning that what we're talking about today is around digital adoption by customers, not employees. But that doesn't mean that the organization and your employees can't either hinder you or help you. And so just some considerations here. One is around getting the organization to embrace a digital culture. So one would be around anticipating employee resistance. So changing anything in terms of process and expectations is going to create some potential friction. So the coaching here would be to just be prepared for that, think through where the likely resistance is going to be, and come up with strategies to address those. Second would be empowering your employees to be digital stewards. And so we gave a couple of examples today around Sephora and Dick's, where the employees have tablets, and even at Kaiser, where they put tools in the locations to help the employees onboard the patients and the customers into the digital channels. And then lastly, this idea of being customer first versus technology first. And I think that's just important mindset to instill in the organization when it comes to digital, that it's about the customer experience and not about the technology. So, Brian, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. We probably spent another hour on enrolling the organization and digital culture, but we didn't want to let today's session go by without at least mentioning it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost a separate topic of its own. I mean, digital culture is fundamental and pretty critical in today's world. I think the only thing I'd add, Mike, to this is really just when you look at your organization, and we see a lot of this as well, just cross-industry, and it depends on kind of where organizations are in their own transformation, but really looking at where digital sits and stands in your organization today. You know, we had that great polling question at the beginning of the session focused on, okay, so how confident am I that, you know, my company is organized against my digital strategy? Well, that's critical in terms of where digital sits. So folks who are a little bit more marketing focused, sometimes we see that the digital organization sits under a CMO. Some folks are more technology focused, it's under a CIO or the CTO. What we see is really digital is a cross-functional expertise and a cross-functional horizontal to really empower the organization. So just when you look at your organization, you look at your culture, how do you actually broaden that and really get that digital mindset in place, customer first mentality in place?
Okay, great. So we're going to cover one more topic here. So, but before we do that, I just want to remind everybody we are going to open it up for questions here at the end. And so if you have questions, please go into the chat feature and type them in, and we'll cover those as they come in here at the end. So just, you know, the last thing we wanted to touch on, Brian, is this idea of where to start or how to start. And I guess my question would be, if you're, you know, at one end of the spectrum, we probably have organizations that are on their second or third iteration of augmented reality. And then maybe at the other end of the spectrum, we perhaps have organizations that have a website that's maybe responsive, and they're just considering about whether or not to build an app. So kind of thinking through you know both ends of that spectrum and everybody in between. How do you start? How do you take on digital adoption, and especially with the idea of continuous improvement? So and I know that you've got some thoughts here.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I think, as we covered a little bit earlier before, the key thing is really, you know, first getting the goal setting, establishing the goal setting, and what are you trying to achieve? So where some organizations are really far along in terms of their use of digital, like your example of maybe that third or fourth iteration of the AR app, and then others who are, you know, just kind of catching up. It doesn't really matter where you are in that spectrum. I think every organization really needs to start with understanding, okay, first, what are the digital best practices out there today? Kind of what is the art of the possible? What is really driving digital for consumer behavior? Consumers really, they're going to have a full view in terms of what's out there, whether it be Uber or the likes of everyone's favorite competitor, Amazon, in terms of what digital best practices are in the market today. Once you actually have an understanding of those table stakes, so the basic foundational principles of digital adoption, then you can kind of move into the next step, which is really prioritizing your objectives against those goals. So what are you trying to achieve as a business? Then kind of working with the right metrics in place, look to start to actually develop that roadmap. So it's a long journey. And digital is an ongoing journey as well. It's not finite. It will continue to evolve as new technologies turn on and really as competitors turn on. So it's really about understanding how you actually rationalize that roadmap against those objectives. And the next component here is really about measuring success. So oftentimes we hear it a lot. An organization will go through a massive digital transformation and they actually can't tell you where it started, where it ended, and really what the result was. So making sure, again, you've got the right tools in place to measure and benchmark and understand how you're performing, and more importantly, how you're improving on that journey. And then the last point really is around, again, that digital ready culture and having the processes in place where you can continue to adapt. Because, as I mentioned, digital is not finite. It's an ongoing transformation process, and it will continue in terms of its complexity. It'll continue in terms of the benefits of which will enable it as well. So making sure that you are moving your organization to be a customer-first organization and a digital-first organization is pretty critical. So, Mike, that's kind of how we view the world today in terms of where organizations can start. I think it doesn't really matter if you're, again, a digital leader or a digital laggard. The process is the same, and really it's about understanding where you are today and where you're trying to get to in the future.
Okay, thanks, Brian. It was a great summary. So, yes, my takeaway here is that it really doesn't matter where your starting point is, because there is a repeatable process when it comes to driving digital adoption. So Carol, I think we're going to go to questions next. And we do have some questions coming in, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please type them into chat, and we'll get to as many as we can within the time allowed. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll follow up with you offline. So Brian, the first question that came in was around whether we would recommend a pull or a push strategy, or perhaps some combination of both when it comes to establishing the digital strategy. And just thinking about that, and if we're not interpreting this the right way, let us know. But my assumption here is around, I think, the customer, right? So are we following the customer, or is the customer, or are we leading the customer when it comes to digital and driving digital adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a challenging one to answer as well. I think it depends on your organization. So some organizations will want to kind of set the market in terms of digital. So I saw recently, actually, Bank of America, they actually created a brand new voice assistant called Erica. So they're actually an organization which they feel confident enough where they're trying to push their customers into a new digital channel. We have other organizations who, I think, Mike, you kind of set it up in terms of just turning on that mobile responsive site. So it really depends where you are on that spectrum and where your customers are. I would say today, there is a fear in terms of demographics and in customer base. Well, are my customers ready for digital? And I would say yes, they are, as demonstrated by the massive app usage across all different generations. But just kind of go back to the question, pull or push, highly dependent on your organization. Oftentimes you'll need a balance or a mix of both. So kind of a waffly answer there, but again, it depends on where you are. So Mike, I'm not sure what your take is on that question based off what you're seeing in the market today.
Yeah, Brian, I think our sense from the JD Power side would be that you really need to understand your customer well. And I think this is another, case study one we didn't talk about today, but when you look at DocuSign and the way that they were able to get market traction with their app and their digital solution, when they first came out with it, they actually didn't get a lot of adoption. And then they went and actually had to sit down and study their customers, and very specifically their customer workflow, to understand that when you get e-signature in a document, it's likely going to have to go to the next person or that person's supervisor for signature as well. And then it will need to go back to the countersigner and so forth and so on. And so in their case, it was really more about really understanding their customer's workflow. And then once they were able to adapt the solution to that, that's when it really took off. And so So I think our answer to that would be to really understand the customer and what they're trying to do. Another one, Brian, is around this idea of whether or not you actually need a mobile app. And so I think the question is, if everything's going mobile and my company doesn't have an app, do we actually need one? Or can we get by with just a responsive website?
Yeah, and Mike, you and I talk about this frequently, I think, as well. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one which is always out in the market today. I hear it often. So it's highly dependent on the solution of what you're trying to provide. And the way that I always phrase this is really increasing complexity requires increasingly complex solutions. So if you're looking to do, or if your customer is looking to do something as basic as kind of pay my bill, well, a responsive site is actually good enough for that. If you're trying to do something where it requires a lot of data, so geo-targeting per the Dick's example, or even kind of establishing loyalty programs, well, then an app probably makes sense. So again, it does depend on what your organization is trying to achieve, and it does depend on the complexity of the experience of what you're trying to drive. We would say here at Centric Digital, though, we do believe that interactions and the experiences which customers are looking for are becoming more complex. So we do advocate in most situations for a business that there will be a business need for the application. Bit of a mixed bag, though, and really it's about starting with the customer, understanding what that journey is, and then providing the right level of solution for that customer based off of their need.
Okay,
so, Mike,
thanks,
that's
Brian.
kind of our take, yeah.
So we've had several questions that have come in around the organization and employees, and I think kind of when we had one slide on it today, and I think we said that we could probably spend an hour on the topic, but let's take a couple of these, and then perhaps we can schedule another webinar where we talk more about employee digital adoption and more about enrolling the organization. But just for today, a question came in around how do you recommend addressing employee concerns that digital engagement or digital adoption in this case will replace their role or their job. And this is actually, it's interesting because this is actually a topic, again, from Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report last week. They actually brought up the same issue. So, Brian, from the Centric Digital standpoint, have you seen this concern come up in any of your projects, and how have you guys either coached clients on addressing it, or what kind of best practices have you seen?
Yeah, another great question here, and I'd say the probably clearest parallel where you have seen adoption in this space, which is putting some pressure on the labor force, is actually on the wealth management side and robo-advisors. So actually robo-advisors, while they're maybe perceived as maybe taking jobs or creating that kind of fear around, is this solution going to replace what I'm doing today? What we're actually seeing is augmenting and actually making life easier for the engagement around employees and actually the services of which they can provide back to the end customer. So really what we see at Centric Digital, and we've seen this through some of our client engagements as well, is by turning on these digital channels and actually enabling the different types of digital solutions in the marketplace, you're able to empower your employees to provide either better customer service or actually value-added activities. So we see it as an accretive solution more than anything else, and really about a value additive solution than something that's just taking away. Another perfect example that I always like to bring to the floor is on contact center. So contact centers can oftentimes get overwhelmed in times of emergency, or just in times of when customers are reaching out because of a large influx of new product launch, new inquiries, et cetera. So actually a lot of the solutions today, using AI tools, using machine learning, can take a lot of that 80% of those basic questions, where it could be, what number I need to call to get this tree taken down, to I'd like more information in terms of I can return the service. Taking that 80% of basic questions and queries away and letting the professionals focus on that 20% of more sophisticated need to help those clients and help those customers. So again, we see it really as a value add tool, and that's something that we usually coach our clients with in terms of helping their employees engage the new digital tools out there in the market today.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Another question came in around just the fact that several of the examples we used today were about retail. So we talked about Walgreens and Sephora and Dick's. But how do the things we talked about today in terms of digital adoption apply to industries outside of retail, where it may not be as competitive, or the industries may be perceived as digital laggards?
Yeah, these are some really great questions. So now I'm glad they're coming in, and this is pretty critical. It doesn't matter where you are from an industry perspective in terms of use of digital, or retail. Obviously, it's very competitive, so they need to be a little bit farther ahead than potentially some other folks. But really, what we're seeing is consumers have these expectations that are being set by the Amazons of the world. They're being set by the Walgreens of the world. So now, as a consumer, if you enter a store or physical front, whether it be a banking branch, whether it be an actual retail outlet, your expectations have changed because this new type of solution, this better solution, is in the marketplace today. So you do need to have a cross-industry view, and we see that whether you be in the health insurance world, the healthcare world, or also in the retail world. Having that cross-industry view and a cross-industry understanding of what best practices are and what customer and consumer expectations are is critical to being successful in terms of driving digital adoption.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And another question, which is there might be another challenging one here, but let's take it. The question is around how much resources and time and money are typically allocated per customer to push digital presence. And I kind of take that question as being not just about the acquisition of digital customers or the conversion to a digital channel, but kind of everything above and beyond that goes into supporting those digital channels. So how should organizations think about the benefits and the ROI? I think is perhaps one way to go at it. And then I think our recommendation would also be to benchmark this for across your competitive landscape, both in terms of acquisition costs and total investment. But at Centric Digital, how do you guys answer that question when it comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much. It's not just based off of understanding, okay, I need to spend $5 per customer, but it's understanding first, how are you prioritizing the different activities of which you're trying to roll out in the digital world to drive that digital adoption. So I think the way that we would approach this, and we do approach this today, is first understanding, okay, what are you trying to achieve? Step one. Step two, kind of where are you today? And then helping you actually prioritize the different activities to get to that overarching goal. And then from there, it's really about making sure that you have the right measurement in place to track the results. I can't tell you today that you should spend X in social media or Y in digital marketing activities without first understanding, again, what your overarching objectives are as an organization, and then where are you in terms of your current capability. So it's really about starting with that benchmarking and then establishing the digital key performance indicators to drive that digital adoption and overarching digital success. So I'm not sure if that kind of touches on the question or hits on the question, Mike, but that's our approach to actually helping organizations earmark and demonstrate ROI on their digital spend.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Hey, so Brian, I'm getting the signal that we need to wrap things up here, and we did get some questions we're not going to be able to answer today, but thank you for submitting them, and we'll follow up with you, offline. So I do want to thank everybody for taking the time today to join us, and then information on how to reach out to us is here. Carolyn, any also last minute instructions or guidance for the participants today?
Just to let you all know that once again, we will be sending out the slides by close of business tomorrow, and we do have a recording of this presentation that we're going to make available to you as well, probably within the next couple of days.
Okay, so that concludes today's webinar, and thanks everybody for your time and for joining us today.